Okay, excuse me. I'm Dwayne Emanuel. It looks like we do have, I'm the secretary of the BCRC, and it looks like we have a quorum here. It looks like we might be missing one person, but I believe we have four of the five BCRC members present. Let's see. Randy, are you here?
Let's see here. There, is that better?
That's better. I can hear you now. So Randy's here. John DeGuire's here. John, could you unmute and say you're here? I think you're here. Arthur Merdinian's here, correct?
That is correct.
And then also Molly Olson, sorry.
Here.
Okay. I guess we'll get started with the meeting. Bill or Stephanie, did you have something you wanted to say before we got started?
Stephanie, you need to unmute, please.
I'm Lauren, so I'm not sure if you're thinking I'm Stephanie.
I'm sorry, I missed you. So everybody's here. I missed Lauren, I apologize.
It's okay.
So it looks like we have all five members present. I'm not sure whether Stephanie or Bill are responding or not, but I guess at this point, the five members of the committee need to elect a chairman of the committee. That's between you folks. Is there anyone interested in handling that position?
I would say that I've been chairman of this committee for perhaps the last 3 code cycles. Is that correct, Dwayne? Maybe more.
I know of at least two.
Yeah, and have been on the committee since 1995, and I would be willing to continue as chairman. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any of the other committee members might have. Or
This is Molly. I don't know what it goes into it. So Arthur, I think it would be great if you would do it.
I have no objections either.
Can we do an introduction?
That sounds like a good idea. Arthur, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'm Randy Beckendorf. I'm the president of Beck's Construction Services. We're a commercial general contractor. That's it.
Okay. Lauren, what's your pedigree?
I'm Lauren Brickman. I'm a residential structural engineer, work for Frontenac Engineering.
John DeGuire, how about yourself? How about Molly?
I am Molly Olson. I'm the owner of Ecocentrics Consulting. We are an energy consulting firm here in St. Louis.
Okay. Arthur, how about yourself?
and Arthur Merdinian is my name. I work for Mosby Building Arts. I'm a registered architect, and I've been in architecture and construction industry for over 30 years.
So would anybody like to make a motion for Arthur?
I'll make a motion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Arthur, would you like to take over the meeting now?
Okay, well, as everyone did, I'm gonna assume that everyone got the meeting packet with the agenda and the all the other information. So if somebody wouldn't mind, can we have approval of the agenda? I would need a motion and a second. Don't be shy.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Very good. And do we have a second?
I'll second this.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The agenda is approved. Dwayne, communications is next. There doesn't seem to be anything underneath that. Do you?
Basically, it's the attachments, the meeting attachments were the communications.
Okay, very good. And I, at this point, there's a number of other people on this call. Does anyone else from either from the county have anything that they'd like to say before we get into new business?
Mr. Chair, my name is Jen Frank. I am one of the attorneys in the county counselor's office and just attending in case the committee has any legal questions that they would need me to have someone look into and offer any guidance.
Very good. Thank you.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Chris Falk. I, along with Bill Walterscheid and Dwayne Emanuel, will be speaking for the building plan review section, provide any input to the committee that's necessary.
Very good. Thank you.
And are you able to hear me now?
Yes, Stephanie? Yes.
Okay, so I had to switch computers. So I'm Stephanie Leon Streeter. I'm the Director for Transportation and Public Works. New maybe to some of you. I've been to some meetings, but it's been years and years ago. So I just wanted to make sure you knew who I was.
Very good. Thank you. That there's a couple of other people here, but if they're just gonna maybe part of the new business. So unless somebody else would like to introduce themselves, we will move on to new business. And I'm just gonna let everyone know that my camera's on a laptop off to the side and I'm looking at the documents in the WebEx on larger screens that are in front of me. I'm not off playing solitaire or something. So, okay, so new business. So we have a proposed code change here regarding, looks like temporary structures and membrane structures. Dwayne, would you or maybe Chris want to introduce this or have any comments?
I guess what I would say is Mr. Johnson probably is the one that presented it, so he would probably be the first one to start out, is what I would say.
Then that sounds good. Mr. Johnson, if you would just introduce yourself, let us know who you're with and introduce your change.
You bet. Well, good morning. My name is Gary Johnson. I'm Vice President of Horizon Companies in St. Louis. We are a manufacturer of custom air structures that are manufactured and installed worldwide. On the call with me is our Vice President of Engineering, Tom St. He has a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Missouri-Rolla. Has been pretty involved with the American Society of Civil Engineering, writing chapters regarding these these structures. So Tom's on with us, and we also have Brian Richter on, who helped to draft the change form. Brian is a licensed Missouri architect. So that is who we are. And did you want some context on the change forms, or what would you like me to say?
Yeah, if you could just introduce the change and, kind of discuss what you're looking for.
Yeah, so essentially, and I'll let Tom and Brian jump in on any of the technical stuff, but so we manufacture these buildings. They go up and are manufactured and installed all around the United States in multiple municipalities and counties. And this particular change came up because we have multiple air structures that are being specified within the St. Louis County market. One of those, I think, that is specific to Chris is one called Shalom Church, which has been out there for some time. There's another one in Fenton that's going up. There's several others that are being asked about as it relates to air structures. And so as we went through the process of reviewing that along with Chris, we found that obviously, and Tom can speak to this, but there has historically been discrepancy in the code, or at least inconsistencies that cause people like Chris to have to really dig in and figure out what the code is trying to say. And just read it as say, here's what it says. But what we have found is through dialogue with code officials all around the United States that we've had to specifically work together to try to ensure that good decisions were being made as it related to buildings. One of those is on type 2B classification, which I can let either Chris or Tom speak to, but that's one of the situations that we were having you guys review. The other change form is simply changing the temporary building status that is currently set in the county at 90 days back to 180 days, which is the standard. When I did ask about,
Gary, could I interrupt you for a second? On our agenda, we're talking about the temporary structures first. So could you talk about that first?
Sure, yeah. So just the temporary structure setup is 180 days. Pretty much everywhere else. I know it was changed to 90 days in the county. When I asked why, no one seemed to remember why it was switched from 180. So we were just requesting that it changed back to the standard of 180 days.
Dwayne or Bill, I don't have any recollection of, why we may have changed this to 90 days, or was there a point more than, prior to 2015 that the code was 90 days and we just kind of left the ordinance where it was?
That's pretty much it. Chris has an educated guess on that if you want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I think it would be good to hear.
Okay. So the change in doing the research, while I was not present for the initial change, it's likely due to the requirements of BOCA. If the committee is aware, this entire part of the country was a BOCA National Building Code jurisdiction before the advent of the international code. And while the temporary structure limit in BOCA was written to be 180 days, the membrane structure section in BOCA required compliance with membrane structures with that section at 90 days. So there was some overlap there, where if you had a structure between 90 and 180 days, you would have to comply both with the temporary structure requirements and with the permanent structure requirements. So it appears that the change was made in favor of the more strict requirement to resolve that overlap, that discrepancy. And then that was carried forward. I went back through BOCA, back through 15 years of BOCA, and it was the same every edition. And then it looks as though previous committees carried that change forward into the IBC, just as that was the way the county had always been doing business. Is there any questions on that? Does that help at all?
Yeah, so it sounds like you say there was a discrepancy where in one place it was 90 days, one place it was 180 days. Now that we're into the IPC, was that discrepancy was kind of fixed and now everything's 180 days?
In the code as printed, yes, it's
Okay.
180 days.
All right, so, basically what this is asking us to do is to we'd basically be deleting the county's change to the code and we'd be working with the code as written.
Yes,
It's
if I could,
temporary structures issue.
yeah, if I could expand on that just a little bit.
Sure.
The proposed change here that the proponent has advanced. Let me see if I can change. I'm trying to share my screen. Is everybody seeing the documents I've been putting up? And I'm trying to blow them up so it's visible on smaller screens. Is it readable for everybody?
Yes, right now I can see the agenda.
Okay. Let me see if I can get to a different page. All right, I may have to struggle with this. The point I'm trying to make is the proponent advances changing one section in the temporary structure section, specifically 3103.1.1, item 1. And if the committee chooses to act on that, it would also be necessary to change 2 other sections that the proponent hasn't mentioned, because that 90 days appears in 2 other places. So are you still seeing the agenda on your screen, Arthur?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll have to figure out if I can switch to a different screen, but I can tell you it would also occur in section 3103.1, which is the initial lead-in section for temporary structures, where it specifically has a sentence saying membrane structures erected for a period of 90 days or longer shall comply with section 3102. So obviously, if this change is to be made, it won't do any good to change it in just one place and have a conflicting section telling you something else. And
Okay.
likewise, in 3102.1, which is the lead-in section for membrane structure, that likewise says that it shall apply to membrane structures erected for a period of 90 days or longer. So that section would also need to be changed to avoid a conflict. I will stop talking and see if I can figure out a way to share a different screen and to make that a little more clear to you.
Chris, would you need anything from the applicants on changing the request? Or is that something that can simply be cleaned up as a motion?
That would not be for me to speak to.
Yeah. We should be able to
Motion would
clean
work.
that up as a motion, right, Dwayne?
Yes. On this situation, yes.
It's so in our packet, I see that we got a copy. You included the area of 3103.1 but we did not get a copy of 3102.1.
That's right above it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Did I succeed in sharing a different document?
Yes, it looks like we're looking at the ordinance now.
Yes. So this, if that's readable for you, what I've boxed out here and scrawled proposed change next to is the proponent's proposed change, changing this 90 to 180. And what you should be able to see now is the section that I'm pointing out would also need to be changed. I'll wait while you digest that, and then you can let me know when you want me to move on to the next section.
I guess my question is if we're no longer making a change to the code, are these things that just get taken out of the ordinance as a change, and it's just, you look at the code?
That might be a question for Genevieve, but basically we got to change, if it's actually going to, you guys approve it, we have to change it back to the 180. And then when we adopt the 2001 code or whatever, then this section wouldn't even be there in the ordinance. We just stay as written in the code.
Okay, that sounds like an easier way to proceed at this point.
What's your next section, Chris?
Okay, if the committee is ready to move on,
So before we move on, I want to address these code change proposals like one at a time. So like if we're going to look at another section that's related to one of the other, would it be easier to get a motion right now on this first code change that was related to section 3103.1.1 that would also include 3103.1 and 3102.1? Dwayne, I'm kind of asking you that question.
Yes, I mean, they should be addressed separately, in my opinion.
Okay. And Chris, if we're moving on to a different section, are we looking at a different code change proposal?
He was only talking the 90-day situation in 3 different
Okay.
sections as well.
Okay, so this is just the 3102.
Yes.
Okay.
I do have some more information for the committee beyond this. I'm just giving you a chance to discuss and digest this.
Sure. Do any of the other committee members, for me, I think this is pretty cut and dry. I mean, clearly the 180 days has been in the code for a while, and the 90 days seems to be a holdover from a long time ago. But if anyone has any comments or, suggestions, otherwise I'd be ready to put forward a motion on the 180 days.
Well, it doesn't sound like there's a really great reason for keeping it at 90 days then, correct?
That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay.
I'd like to provide the committee with one more piece of information before you consider voting on it, if that'd be all right.
Sure.
Okay. I just want to remind the committee and the proponent that there were other changes made. I've brought up the text of the code as printed. And you can see from the black bar here in the 2015, this section was added to the code, this conformance section. Is that readable for all of you? Do I need to make it larger?
The plan form does allow all of you to enlarge it, if you were not aware.
Very nice. Thank you. Well, as things are Wyatt, I'm gonna make a motion that, we make the change that's proposed to section 3103.1.1, changing the 90 days to 180 days. This motion would also include making the necessary changes to sections 3103.1 and 3102.1. Does that include everything, Chris?
I believe so, but I'd like to have Dwayne speak to that as the secretary.
Very good.
I believe so.
And I
Very good.
would like to continue to make the point again that this section that was added to the 2015 increased the requirement on temporary structures, basically requiring them to comply with many of the requirements of the code. And while this was moved within our ordinance to a slightly different location, it still exists within the ordinance. I just think it's important that the committee and the proponent know that while they may change the duration, it's that the temporary structures are now required to comply with large swaths of the code, same as regular structures. That was the only other point I just wanted the committee to be aware of.
Thank you. So there's a motion on the table. Now is the time, committee members, for any further discussion. If there is no further discussion, I would be looking for a second.
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Very good. Okay, so first change taken care of. We're going to now move on to the next change is, so this changes to section 3102. Dwayne, is there any comment from the county on this change?
I think I'd let Mr. Johnson and his crew start, and then we might have some comments after that.
Very good.
Thanks, Dwayne. I'm going to turn this over to our Vice President of Engineering, Tom Singeon, just to give an overview to the group. And of course, we've got Chris on as well, who can give an overview as well. But Tom, if you don't mind, just putting this in some context.
Sure, yeah. And so basically, in the code for air-supported structures, it defines, or membrane structures, I should say, it defines different types of buildings that fall into the membrane structure category. This includes frame-supported structures that are covered with a membrane. It includes cable-supported structures, whereas you might have a fabric roof or a fabric building, membrane building, where there are, various cables or other items connected to it to provide the structural support. And air-supported structures, which is what we are primarily looking for here, talking about here. The air-supported structure is basically for the most part, mostly sealed building. It is pressurized with makeup air to keep the inside of the building at a higher pressure than the outside of the building. And that creates a tension in the membrane that makes it structural. So I don't know if anybody on the committee is familiar or unfamiliar with these types of structures, but there are a couple around St. Louis. They're very popular around the country and around the world. So the primary uses are sports and recreation, although they can be used for literally anything that you need a large open span for, as long as they're meeting the other code requirements. And so the rub in here, the difficulty in here is it distinguishes air supported structure as a separate having a separate requirement or a different requirement than it does for the frame supported or cable supported membrane structures. And the distinction is that it's looking for the air supported structure to be made with completely non-combustible materials. And since it's a membrane structure, that would be a non-combustible membrane. On the frame or cable supported structures, it allows those buildings to be considered a type 2 construction with material that passes an NFPA 701 flammability test. So in other words, the fabric can't just simply burn or continue to burn. It self-extinguishes and does not propagate in a fire. So the difficulty with the way the code is written, it's calling for air supported structures to require fully non-combustible membrane material, which simply is not feasible for an air supported structure. The only type of material that would meet this requirement would have a fiberglass based scrim instead of a polyester based scrim, which fiberglass based scrim, if you fold it or roll it tightly, those fibers can break, you lose your structural strength, and it defeats the whole structural design of the membrane. And so what most jurisdictions, in fact, every air supported structure project that I've been involved in at Horizon for the last 20 years, and everyone I'm aware of in the country that has also gone up, has been classified as a type 2 construction based on what I believe is this NFPA 701 test criteria. Now, the problem with, and this is going a little bit in the weeds, but the problem with the way the code is written, it is pointing to, for non-combustible membrane, another test that tests that base scrim I was talking about. But that particular test or that particular standard specifically says it doesn't apply to membrane materials, coated membrane materials. So in essence, the air structure material would have to pass a test that's not intended for the very membrane material that it's being asked to meet. So that's kind of the conflict that we see set up. The only potential resolution is kick everything out and call it a type 5 construction, which is a catch-all for anything under the sun, or have it interpreted as a type 2B construction, which most every jurisdiction that I know of in the country has done so. All the air structures that are up, to my knowledge, have all been classified as type 2 construction.
Hey, Tom, just for the committee's edification, we did supply, I think, multiple examples of that through this process somewhere. I don't think it was with the change form, but examples of projects that have gone through the type 2B classification. So if they need that as backup information, we have that, but I think we had sent that in earlier at some point.
And then the
Gary and Tom, sorry,
Yeah.
this is Brian Richter with CNI Design.
Yeah.
And just to expand on what Tom was saying, the frame membrane structure and the cable supported are specifically noted as type 2B in the code. And the air supported becomes a classification question because it's not specifically stated like the other two. But the elements of the system, whether it's air supported or cable supported, really perform in a very similar fashion. The cables either support it from gravity or they support it from air. And to differentiate and put them in two different construction classifications doesn't really make sense, because inherently, if a cable supported structure has a failure and a cable fails, the membrane is going to come down really quickly. If an air supported structure has a cable failure, it's going to take hours for that membrane to deflate and come down. So if there is, if you're looking at it from a safety perspective and a life safety issue, the air supported is essentially more inherently safe than a cable supported structure. So to differentiate and put that in a different construction classification logically doesn't add up. It just seems like the code did not specifically state, frame structure, cable supported, and air supported as type 2B. It only noted those two, and there really is not commentary or an explanation as to why air supported is not considered 2B. It just becomes not 2B by default because it's not specifically stated. So, Tom, I just wanted to add that to kind of expand on what you were explaining there.
Right. So, to add, I guess the one of the main points or issues that we're running into here in St. Louis County is, in order for the way the code is written, in order for this air supported structure or an air supported structure to be classified as type 2B construction, the membrane would have to be completely non-combustible as opposed to fire resistant, as the frame supported or cable supported structures can be. And so like I said, the materials that are used for air supported structures cannot be completely non-combustible. It's just not possible for that construction type. And so there's really no avenue, as the code's written right now, with the specific language they're using for an air supported structure to be accepted as type 2 construction. Although like I said, the overwhelming, not industry, all of the buildings that have been put up in the United States, to my knowledge, have all been classified as type 2B construction. And I can't speak for what other people are thinking in that process, but I think it's, as most people read the code, they see this as a pretty cut and dry, that this is the right classification for this type of building material.
Hey, Tom, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So how many, you've been doing this 20 years, how many air structures that have been classified type 2B of similar design to the one being proposed in St. Louis, or just in general, air structures of sports and recreation, would you say you've put up around the United States with Horizon?
For Horizon, we've probably done about 200 of them.
Okay.
And
of
in
those,
that time span, it's probably been another 200 to 300 as well.
So several hundred domes, and in those cases, were they all classified type 2B construction?
Yeah, to my knowledge, they all have been, yes.
Following the same code, they're all following, all the code officials have to interpret that same code. And to be clear to the committee, the issue we have is one of the tests that the code, where the discrepancy is at, is one of the tests that it requires us to pass. The ASTM has clearly stated is not designed for coated fabric.
Right.
So it can't pass the test.
Right, that's correct.
So anytime we've looked at this in other models, and they've looked at other municipalities and counties, they've looked at that and said, well, yeah, this particular test, this is asking for this fabric to pass. The testing is not set up for it. It clearly states by the ASTM it's not supposed to pass it. So therefore, what's happened, getting back to Brian Richter's point, when you look in the code, there's a cable restricted and a cable supported, the same fabric. And one is being given the go-ahead on type 2B construction and the other isn't because of the way the cables work.
Yeah,
right?
it seems to be, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
Mm-hmm.
And to add to that, Gary, it's just the code allows type 2B for frame structures and cable supported with an NFPA 701 compliant membrane, which if you look at a parallel to a conventional building, a roof membrane with a Class A fire rating like the dome fabrics meet, is an acceptable roof membrane on any building in the code. So that's really what we're looking at here, and the code clearly defines a cable support or a cable supported structure with an NFPA 701 compliant membrane as type 2B. And we're just wanting to clean up the intent of the code. There's really not a logical reason why air supported is not also looked at the same way as cable supported. So that's the main request, is just to align those two types of membrane structures to be consistent in the code.
So I have a couple of questions. It
Sure.
does kind of sound like that this is an issue where like you said, the code's not consistent. Maybe they haven't completely vetted this issue. So, you know, that being the case, it seems like this would be an issue for you across the board. So if you put up, you know, hundreds of these in other locations, as you go to those locations, are you going through this same process with them?
Not to this level. It really is more of a discussion during the design phase. And have not been involved in all of Verizon's domes, but it does not typically get to the point where we have to come in and have a meeting and a request like this. It's more, it becomes a logical interpretation with the person if they agree with it.
Right. But there are conversations with other code officials going on, and whether those other municipalities are making changes to their ordinances or not, you guys are coming to an agreement and they're saying, yes, this is just something that needs to be cleaned up. So another question my next question is, you know, I would assume there's some sort of national association for this type of construction. And are they in the process of working with the ICC to get this area of the code cleaned up?
And Tom and I are actually doing just that now. So
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, and the
Okay.
problem, Arthur, is, and I hear exactly what you're saying. I mean, there is this, what looks like interpretation that needs to be done. It would be much cleaner, obviously, to have it done at the national level and have that done. Those books only come out every so often, so many years, so you have to kind of get into their window.
Oh,
to be
yeah.
able to have any of that change made.
Yeah. No, I understand. Can be a time consuming process.
Yeah.
I was more just wanted to know if that, you know, if you're already looking at trying to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Wasn't necessarily looking that it's happened. So.
Right. And Gary's right. It's a 3-year window, and if you miss a cycle, you're 3+ years out to the next.
Oh.
And
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We're familiar with that.
yes.
So
Yes, Tom and I are in communication with ICC to get in the process for the next code cycle to get that done, or make that request at least.
yeah.
So
Okay, very good. Those were my questions. Were you guys done with what you had to say regarding this proposal?
I had a question. So am I to understand that there are 0 of these structures within St. Louis County?
No, so there are a couple of structures within St. Louis County that have been classified as temporary structures, right? And so they're not up year round. And so as a temporary structure, the non-combustibility requirement is less of an issue. There's other areas through the code that they are adopted or approved based on the size and occupancy and other exemptions for overhead sprinklers, things like that. And so that's how those have been approved. We're looking at doing this for permanent buildings as well. And so this stipulation of not being able to be called class or type 2 construction is really halting or precluding the use of air supported structures for a permanent building.
And Randy, just for clarification, and you did say St. Louis County, so I understand that, but we have an 80,000 square foot manufacturing air structure that's over in, is it Madison County, I guess, Tom? Right across the river. From downtown, that we brought some people from the county over just to see it, because that is a type 2B construction. It's an 80,000 square foot building. It's been there since 2005. And we construct all of the air structures that we send all around the world in that building. And it is an 80,000 square foot dome. So while it's not technically in St. Louis County, it's right across the river. Venice, it's, I think, technically called Granite City, but it's right across the river there from downtown St. Louis.
So based on the change that we just made 15 minutes ago, where temporary structures are to be held to the same criteria as permanent structures, does that mean that going forward, if we don't make this change, there will be 0 allowed air structures in St. Louis County from this point, if we don't make this change?
I don't think so, because what we're talked about earlier is, for temporary structures to be used up to 90 days, it still uses the International Fire Code as the path for approval. There's certain sections in the IBC still that have to be met, of course. But then for temporary structures with the IFC, the overhead sprinklers is not a requirement based on certain things, as long as certain criteria are met, right? So that's been one of the biggest proposed changes or issues there.
If I may interject on that, just to clarify, the county's building code ordinance deleted that reference to the International Fire Code for temporary structures. So our current ordinance does not have a link to the fire code, which we do not adopt. We only use it by reference. So those 6 pages of requirements in the fire code on both temporary and permanent membrane structures are not part of St. Louis County's enforcement. Likewise, the requirement that I pointed out, the new requirement in 2015, which is in the code as printed and adopted, it's not a local ordinance, requires compliance with the IBC's requirements for fire safety. So that nudges you toward having to consider things like sprinklers that you might not have had to consider in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And the county has a number of other points to make on this, but I didn't want to derail your presentation. I just thought right now, since we're answering questions from the committee, I should speak up about that particular question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just last point, Tom, before Chris and the county jump in on this. So we're a St. Louis County business, as most of you know, headquartered here in St. Louis, and we're just hopeful that during this process we can truly evaluate this model simply on this point. And I get what the code says, and I understand there's inconsistency, but the only county that we have not been able to get type 2B classification in is the one in which our headquarters resides. And so you're going to find that this is not the first and only. I mean, we are getting multiple inquiries from companies wanting to put up sports and recreation complexes, one of which is looking like it's going to move out of St. Louis County and into St. Charles County because of the way the code is currently constructed here, which is different than it is across the river and different as it is across the river in Illinois. So I just want to point that out as you guys consider this. I know you'll have more questions, but just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. So I'm going to take that, Gary, is that you guys are done presenting your ideas, and I'm going to give the county an opportunity to present their thoughts. So, is that Dwayne? Is that you or Chris? Or are we going to go back?
Chris
to
has
you?
an item or two to mention.
I think,
Okay.
I think we all have some input for the committee to consider in their deliberation. Before we speak to the proposal itself, I think the committee needs to understand the larger ramifications of it, not just the change you're making here, but how that impacts the rest of the code. So I'm going to see if I can have a little more luck with sharing another document here. that. So do you see the height area table there, Arthur?
Yep.
Okay. So as the committee members are probably aware, the building code controls, hopefully that's legible size, controls risk largely by controlling size, one of the basic core tenets of the code. You can see that a type 5B building, as you can see that I've circled on the right here, A4 meaning a building that is exclusively for the viewing of interior sporting events, is limited to 6,000 square feet in area. Now there is a up to 75-foot frontage increase, but that's still obviously less than 10,000 square feet. And changing this to a type 2B construction, as you can see from the other circle that I've placed in the center of the page, only allows you to go up to 9,500 square feet. So even with the open frontage increase there, the maximum allowable open frontage increase, you really you're less than 20,000 square feet, which is really not the business this company's in, of providing structures much larger than that. So the only way to get a larger structure is to install a sprinkler system, which these structures obviously by their nature are not well suited to, because there is no rigid structure to connect a massive array of sprinkler piping to. Now there is an exception, or rather a specific provision in the code, which I'll scroll to here. Section 504, which allows for unlimited area one-story buildings if they're provided with a sprinkler system. So as you can see from what I've underlined here, it's telling you that an A4 building, again, that would be exclusively for spectator viewing of sporting events, that's not more than 1 story above grade plane, other than type 5 construction. So an A4 building that is of type 5 construction is not eligible to use this section of the code.
Type 5 construction is combustible construction. Wood, basically.
Well, it is construction that allows
Yes.
for combustibles. It doesn't mandate that combustibles be used. It just doesn't restrict them. And as you recall from the proponent's presentation, the membrane structures typically are classified either as 2B or 5B. So this provision of the code here allows such a building to be unlimited in area. Now, this still is a problem for buildings such as the proponent manufactures, because it still requires a sprinkler system, which again, we discussed the difficulty with that. Now, there is an exception here that you see, exception number 2, and hopefully that's readable for everyone, saying that you may omit the sprinkler system in the area that is occupied for interior participant sports if you meet some other criteria. Specifically, you have to have a manual fire alarm system, and you have to have exit doors directly to the outside from that participant sports area. So the effect of this change is that you are taking a building that would have been limited to less than, I'll just round off here, less than 10,000 square foot of area, and you are now allowing it, you're giving it a pathway to be unlimited in size, constrained only by the size of the lot on which it's located.
And Chris, that really aligns with the cable supported and frame supported.
Absolutely, and that's the point I'm going to make next.
Yes, sir.
But I want to give the committee just a chance to digest that.
Yes, sir.
So, and that was, that's somewhat eye-popping, obviously, there, the jump in size, but it needs to be placed in context. And as Brian pointed out, This allowance already exists in the code. The proponent is not asking you to create this allowance. They are merely asking you to allow them to use it by virtue of this code change.
Yeah.
So it's something that is already available for a non-combustible frame, non-combustible frame structure with an Nfpa 701 membrane, or a non-combustible cable structure with an Nfpa 701 membrane. I'm not disputing that. I'm just making sure the committee understands. I don't think the proponent did a good job of explaining why they want this change. Just, you know, and I think, although I'm putting words in the proponent's mouth, I think that this is probably accurate description, because you're in the business of providing buildings on the order of tens of thousands of square feet.
Yes, but many times they are, and especially for sports and recreation buildings.
Right.
And that's why, you know, municipalities across the country have you know, really viewed these buildings as, you know, as a type 2 construction, because the inherent safety and nature of how safe these buildings are without overhead sprinklers. It just makes sense that it should not be classified as type 5, which is, you know, as somebody pointed out, you could build it, you know, with every bit of material being fully combustible. You know, a tinderbox type of building would be type 5 construction, and this is far, far from that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand, but to conflate safety purely with construction type is not the way the code is written. It's just one aspect that's considered.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
will point out
True.
that this same section would allow group B, F, M, and S buildings to be type 5 construction, and they can still qualify for this exception.
Right.
So it is only the A4s that's limited to there, and probably in recognition of this exception number 2.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
So I'll move on to another point to consider, again, just to place it in context, is that the code requires that everything outside the area of participant sports be sprinkled. This exception is only for the sports participant area. So that's the spectator seating that is present to create an A4 occupancy. That's any locker rooms, storage rooms, concession areas, toilet rooms, offices, anything of that nature.
Chris, you're saying that those
Sure.
ancillary areas that you just listed, those areas would still have to be sprinkled?
Yes, this exception here that I've pointed out is only for the area occupied for indoor participant sports. And there is a definition for that in chapter 2.
Okay, so it's over the ice rink or the swimming pool.
Yes. So if you were to have let's say a swimming pool with a deck around it, and then you were to have grandstands on both sides, and then of course you would have locker rooms for your swimmers and toilet rooms and showers, all those areas except the actual swimming pool and surrounding deck would be required to be sprinkled in order to use this particular strategy.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the typical approach with these is to have an entry building, and Chris is right, that area a lot of times may be required to be sprinkled, but the dome area where the sports participation is would not. So
Okay, now something else that
We'll point out
another
that you
thing,
have to have seating, spectator seating to qualify as an A4, so you've got to have that in the dome.
correct.
So that area needs to be sprinkled in the dome.
If it has that, Dwayne, not every one of these facilities is designed for spectators.
But
And that
you have to
that
have
would bump
spectator
it to an
seating to
A3.
the A4.
Right, that would be
Right.
A3, right.
A3 would be
Mhm.
And that would-
non-spec.
and that would be an issue as an A3, because as we just pointed out, this provision is for A4 buildings, not A3. And the provisions for A3, unlimited area A3 buildings, as you can see here do not have any such exception for omitting the sprinklers over the indoor participant sports area. Now, speaking personally, it's difficult to see why you would give an allowance like that to an area where you have densely packed spectators, but you would not give the same allowance to exactly the same activity in an area where you didn't have the densely packed spectators and only had the sports participants.
Agreed.
Now, I can only speculate that the reason why is because only the A4 people lobbied for the change. It's the same reason that why is it that the code allows chain link fence to be used as pool barrier, but not any other lattice type fence unless it has much smaller opening, because the chain link people advanced the code change. Why does the code have specific allowances for aircraft manufacturing, but not for tractor manufacturing, to where the aircraft manufacturing can have much larger buildings? Because Boeing's the one who submitted the code change and Boeing doesn't care about tractors. So, all right. So looping back to the train of thought there, this exception that we have pointed out, which is so critical to moving forward with these buildings, because I don't believe the proponent intends to provide sprinkler systems in most cases, because they're largely putting up A4 building that I'll pause here because I don't want to go forward with that if that's an inaccurate statement.
Yeah, I mean, any areas that still require sprinklers would typically have them, right? And that just becomes basically a discussion with each particular city and their fire department and what they are comfortable or uncomfortable with, if there's any further variances that they might allow on a case-by-case basis.
All right, but again, what I was trying to get at was that your business is primarily temporary and A4 building. Yes, no?
Yeah, permanent and A4, yes.
Okay. So just something to be aware of for the building that we took in 2 years ago and have been reviewing as far as the church. That's not particularly helpful there, where we have a mixed use that involves not just potentially A4, but also A2, A3, none of which, there's no relief from this section for that particular building. Now, I know the code change is very general. I don't want to get bogged down into the discussion of just one specific building, but I just feel it'd be remiss not to mention that.
Right, exactly.
So.
And Chris, just to clarify your point, I mean, that's we see this every day. The NFL Hall of Fame's 100,000 square foot dome that we installed in June has both. It has the full open space with no sprinkler system, and it has several locker rooms inside the facility which are sprinkled. So that we run into that on a regular basis, depending on what's going inside the building. Brian could talk to that as well. We're working on projects all over where that's the case, where they don't sprinkle the location where the sports are being played, but if there's locker rooms or office space or whatnot, they are required.
Okay. So,
and the primary benefit is the increase in area to allow for the sports functions to be able to happen. Because with air supported being eliminated, it really removes that from being able to use that as a potential building type. And, not that cost is necessarily an issue with the code, with the committee's decision. You're looking at a half to or less for the cost of this structure to provide that space over a conventionally built building. So that's part of the reason for the drive, because it functions well with the long spans to be able to allow for football, soccer, baseball, whatever you want to do in those spaces. And this alignment with air supported being aligned with cable supported and frame supported allows that area to be something that we can meet in the code.
So I just want to make sure that the committee is aware of this, because again, this was not made clear in the code change, because you're focused on the change you want to make. So I just want to make sure they're aware of the ramifications of it. It's not like we see a lot of membrane structures, obviously. So now moving forward from this, if you take advantage of this exception, which it's the designer's prerogative to do, then the building will not be fully sprinklered in accordance with NFPA 13 anymore. So, and the code, the ICC and BOCA before it have spoken to this. So, I mean, this is a building code allowance. It would be allowed under the building code, but you may not take any of the other breaks that require the entire building to be suppressed throughout in accordance with NFPA 13. So a building that, for instance, might have corridors where the corridors might not have to be rated if the building was suppressed throughout in accordance with NFPA 13, will now have to have rated corridors because the building is no longer suppressed throughout in compliance with NFPA 13. It's taking advantage of an exception in the building code. Again, that doesn't stop the design, it just influences the design.
And the other approach to that can be a firewall to separate the areas. But anyway, you're exactly right. It becomes more of a design issue than a code issue.
Well, and absolutely, a Section 706 firewall would create an entirely new building.
Right.
And with its own potential construction type, along with every other facet being separate. But it also seems like it would be extremely challenging, if not impossible, to create a Section 706 compliant firewall within one of your dome structures with all the requirements for continuity and the movement in an air supported structure.
Plus extensions beyond building envelope and things like that. It's not something
the requirements for continuity.
It's not something we would typically look at inside the dome. It would be a separation to the dome.
It looks like you would have difficulty even providing a fire barrier.
That's something that's more of a design issue and just another design avenue that we may look at on a case by case basis. But that's not really what we were focused on with our request. It was more just alignment with the building and construction type with the other cable supported and frame supported. Because there's really not a logic that I could reach to exclude air supported because it's not different. It's not really different from the other two. So
I can move on to the next point, or I don't know if the committee needs a chance to question any of this or digest any of it.
I'm good. If anyone else has questions or comments, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I'm good.
Okay. Speaking for the building plan review section, we don't necessarily agree with a lot of the reasoning advanced by the proponents. From the objection to the required tests, which we agree that a laminated fabric shouldn't be tested to the ASTM test. And in fact, the code doesn't require that. It specifically says that you should go ahead and test just the base requirement to the ASTM test. So you see the code in the section I've brought up here for non-combustibility tells you it references two subsections. This is the commentary, by the way. So you see the code text, and then you see some commentary to the code text added below it. It tells you elementary materials or homogeneous materials are tested in accordance with ASTM E136. Composite materials, where you have laminations, have their base tested in accordance with ASTM E136, and then have the laminated fabric tested, or the laminated product fabric, in this case, tested in accordance with ASTM E84 or UL 723. So, and I would point out that even ASCE 55, which is written purely to correspond to it's written only for membrane structures. And the newer version, the 2016 version that the code doesn't reference, now includes provisions for air-supported structures, which it did not previously include. I mean, within it, it even breaks down different classifications. Now, there's no need to reference the standard. In fact, the IBC specifically says you're to handle the area, the construction type in accordance with the IBC, and only sends you to this document for other aspects. But it has the class 1 membrane where it refers to a non-combustible membrane that has to meet the definition for non-combustible building materials established by the AHJ, and then says that they, on top of that, have to meet the NFPA 701 requirement.
Right.
Now,
And this
again,
would
you're
be-
not required to have a class 1 membrane under the standard. And again, I don't want to add confusion to say that the standard is applicable. There are other options under the standard. I'm just pointing out the standard recognizes that the highest level of membrane, would meet non-combustibility requirements per the building code, in addition to NFPA 701.
Right. In this standard, the material we use would typically be considered a class 2 membrane in the ASTM E55, or I'm sorry, ASCE 55.
Likewise, this section that I've brought up here, which is from the commentary to the actual membrane structure section of the IBC, in the area that I've outlined here in red, says that non-combustible membranes and liners have to meet the criteria of 703.5, which I've already showed you, which specifically references that ASTM E136. So again, the code doesn't appear to be a mistake on the part of the code that it's sending you to this specific section and to this specific test specifically for membranes.
But Chris, the inconsistency is differentiating between cable supported and frame supported, which allow for NFPA 701 and ASTM E84 membranes, and air supported. And it slides into this because it's not specifically differentiated. It's not specifically stated in the sentence that says frame supported and cable supported.
I understand.
And that's what we're requesting. That's what we're requesting.
You made a specific objection to the fact that you were asked to comply with a test that was not applicable, that you couldn't possibly pass for that. That's the only reason I raised the issue. I understand your point.
Yeah.
That, hey, we think we should be treated the same as
Right.
these other structures which are covered with identical membranes.
Right. And that was the main point of what we wrote up, is classifying them all consistently.
I hear what you're saying, but you've made these other statements, and we have to.
And it really,
How do you separate the fabric from
its.
Tom, can you address this? I mean, how do you? We've already talked about this with that test.
Yeah. So just for clarification, I know Chris knows this. Didn't mean to interrupt, but this ASTM E136 test, for those who are not familiar with it, you've got a composite material. It's a coated fabric. You've got a polyester-based scrim, and then you've got PVC with other additives coated onto that membrane. You can't separate them. Once it's coated, it's put together, it's bonded together. All of the fire resistivity chemicals and additives are in the PVC. It's not in that base polyester scrim. This E136 test says you have to eliminate all of the coatings of that base scrim, only test the base scrim without any coatings, or in this case, without any protection of that base scrim. Put it in a blast furnace of, I think, 750 degrees, which is far higher than any normal temperature you would see in a normal building, unless it was directly in a flame, right, or in a fire. That's the only way that this base scrim can ever get anywhere close to that temperature. And so, of course, by the nature of being polyester, it's not going to pass that particular test. And the main question, it's more, I understand what the code says, what it is, but to me, it's a common sense question, right? A, you can never have just the base scrim by itself without the coating. B, it'll never be anywhere close to 750 degrees unless it's held directly into a flame. And C, that's exactly what this NFPA 701 test is. You take that coated membrane with the coating on the outside, you hold it directly into the flame and see if it passes. And in fact, the material used for the air supported structure passes with flying colors. It self-extinguishes, it doesn't continue to burn. The building's not going to go up in flame. You have to literally hold a flame directly on that material in order to get any kind of reaction. And so that's what we're seeing is the air structures with this NFPA 701 approved fabric is being thrown into the same type of construction as, and I know Chris says it doesn't necessarily have to be, but a wood frame, completely wood construction, which burn, you start a fire in one part of the building, it can propagate through the rest of the building. It won't happen with an air structure. It can't propagate. And so that's the rub. That's what we're struggling with is how do you take air supported structure, which by the materials that are used are unbelievably safe. The track record is phenomenal. These buildings don't burn to the ground. In fact, there's been tests done in the past, long before I got in the industry, where they intentionally put fires and flames in these buildings to see what would happen, and the buildings don't deflate. They lose pressure, they lose air through the opening where the fire does burn the membrane, but the membrane doesn't propagate and the building doesn't burn down. You simply have an air loss through that opening where that hole is developed from the fire. And so, like I said, the safety record is unbelievable. And here we've got a situation, the way the code is written, is we can't build these structures larger because of this ASTM E136 test, trying to test the base scrim of the fabric, where that's a situation that doesn't exist in real life. Okay? That's the real primary problem.
The main inconsistency in the code is that 2 of the 3 types of membrane structures that we've talked about allow for a Class A membrane that is not meeting the definition of non-combustibility, and one does not. All 3 should fall under the same requirements and classifications and test allotments for the membranes.
There's a lot of conflation that's going on there between fire resistance and non-combustibility. Like fire retardant treated lumber is not a non-combustible material, even though it is allowed in certain applications in non-combustible buildings. It is fire resistant by virtue of being treated with a fire resistant chemical. And conflation of the roof membrane with the roof construction and looking at the requirements for a classified roof covering, and trying to conflate that with the requirement for a non-combustible roof structure. If you have a single membrane that's serving both purposes, it has to meet both requirements. But I do not dispute your core point, that is a non-combustible frame structure or a non-combustible cable structure, membrane structure, is allowed to have a membrane that the code does not have verbiage that is allowed for the air supported structure, which I think is your core point here.
And if you parallel,
I'm just sticking to all these other things that you've thrown out.
yeah, and I really think we're getting off that core topic, like you're coming back to, Chris. And if you look at even type 1 buildings in the code, it's the same Class A membranes for roofs are allowed on type 1, which is a completely non-combustible building.
As a membrane, but not as the roof structure itself.
And really, the semantics of that definition, this is really a membrane. Air supports the membrane. Cables restrain the membrane. If it's cable supported, the non-combustible cables support the membrane, but again, the membrane's not holding itself in place. Just
No,
like
it's not.
the cable holds the membrane when it's cable supported, air holds the membrane and cables restrain it, just like a hot air balloon. And both of those elements, air and the steel cables, are non-combustible, just like the point I just made on the comparison to a type 1 building. So and that's where, again, it's just the other two types of membrane structures allow for the Class A membrane meeting NFPA 701, and the air supported should, it seems like logically, should be held to the same consistent requirements.
And again, I can't, I'm gonna say
Yeah.
again, conflating the requirement for the roofs, in the case of roof sheathing, which is the roof construction versus the requirement for the roof membrane, and the definition of a roof assembly in Chapter 2 of the building code, where it recognizes one component may be both, but that doesn't remove its requirement to comply with both sets of criteria.
Right.
That said,
So you
we
have
were
the
asked
same
to-
systems on a cable supported membrane building as you do an air supported, the same exact
Yes.
component.
which I've said multiple times. I'm just
Yep.
speaking to all the other things that you guys have thrown out to say this is why. I don't think we have to respond to the points that you've made. Now, with respect to, we were asked when we reviewed this and pointed out the requirements of the code, we were asked to accept an ICC code opinion, which we said we would consider. And
Chris,
one was requested, and then
Chris, that has nothing to do with this change form. That has to do with a specific project you're working on with Shalom, and that didn't come from us, the manufacturer. We didn't give, that's not from us. So why would you bring that up? That has nothing to do with this change form.
because it speaks directly to the code text.
It doesn't. That's a specific project you're bringing up. We're bringing up a universal code change that needs to be modified or considered by St. Louis County because of the conflicting messaging in the code. This has nothing to do with going out and getting some ICC person to try to render an opinion on something they're not going to render an opinion on, Chris, until it's 3 years later. So that's, I think, a moot point.
I don't agree, and I don't think the rest of the building code review, the building section agrees either. We examine the code text.
Chris, did you have any other points to make here? And I would point out that Chris wasn't interrupting you folks when you were commenting or making your presentation. Chris, do you have any other points to make?
I would finish my point with respect to we've asked ICC for a code opinion on the text. ICC has responded saying that just the problem that you guys are pointing out exists, in that an air-supported structure would not be considered as to-be construction with merely an NFPA 701 membrane on it, the way the code is written now. That is the way BOCA was written. That is the way IBC continues to be written up to the 2021 edition, which is obviously as far as I can go with that. And then if the committee chooses to act on it, however the committee chooses to act on this motion, I think we might suggest slightly different wording, but I think that's something to table until the committee is ready to vote.
This ICC opinion is found on starts on page 18 of 24 in the packet attached to this meeting.
All right. Does anyone on the committee have additional questions? That was a lot of information to absorb. Personally, I mean, I would want to take a little bit more time to be able to read through this the code proposal that was presented, was several pages long, and having heard all the information today, might want to absorb that a little bit more and look at the change that's proposed, and be able to understand a little bit clearer what we're doing, and how to, if we're going to make a motion or propose a change, to make sure that it coordinates with certainly the current code and our current ordinance.
It seems cut and dried to me that there is an established code for the cable supported structures. And it seems clear to me, and it seems fair to me that the air supported structures should be held to the same criteria as the cable supported structures and not distinguish between the two. That's the crux of the question, I think.
Yes, sir.
Randy, I kind of agree with you that, I mean, it seems like clearly these structures are being built, not in St. Louis County currently, but certainly nearby and in other areas of the country. And these, some of these other issues that were discussed have been dealt with in some way. I'm not exactly sure what that is. But I tend to agree that, whether your membrane's hanging from a cable or the cable's holding it from flying away, it's the same membrane. Why should they be treated differently?
That was my point. I think that's fair to look at it in that regard. There's already a code in place for those cable supported structures. I think it would be logical for us to look at the air supported structures in the same manner. That's, I would hate to see business leave the county for splitting hairs.
Absolutely.
What, why move it to St. Charles County or Madison County over something? You could put a cable supported structure here, but not an air supported structure.
Do any other committee members have any comments or thoughts? I'm going to take the silence as a no. I can't necessarily see everybody at once on my the way my computer screen is. So if you were nodding or shaking your head, I can't really tell. I guess, Dwayne, my next question is, if we're is what they're proposing, is the revision that they're proposing, I mean, I think we understand what the intention of what they're looking for is the proposal as they've written it, does that work with the 2015 IBC and the St. Louis County, any St. Louis County codes that may be associated with this.
I guess I would say sort of, but we would have a revised wording of it. And I think it accomplishes the same thing, but we would suggest a revised wording that makes life a little easier on us, I think.
And I kind of got that feeling. You know, as much as I'd love to put this to bed today, it seems like I would also like to be able to see that revised wording. You know, from you guys and how you'd like to see the ordinance change written. Is that a fair request, Wayne?
We can probably put it on the screen right now if you want it.
Oh, well, there you go.
If Chris has it.
You were all prepared.
I'll do my best to put what we agreed to up here.
Was it in the packet that was sent out?
It was not, no.
No, it's
Okay.
just the proponent's suggestion. What are you getting now, Arthur?
I see Chris's, I guess it's Chris's computer screen and
Okay.
it wants him to add WebEx to Chrome.
Okay, all right. Let me monkey around with it a little bit further. Actually, Dwayne, you have the document, don't you?
If I could share my screen, I could pop it up there.
I've got it pulled up, but I'm just having trouble getting it to. I seem to have lost the necessary window.
Is the moderator listening?
That'd be me.
Okay, let me see if I can do it. This is the first time I've tried it, so I don't know. Yeah, there.
Worked.
The only changes are up on the upper paragraph. It's nothing in the bottom paragraph has changed. Or the bottom exception and anything else has changed.
Seems clear enough to me. Any other thoughts or comments?
Looks good to me.
Looks good to me.
Great. Randy, would you like to make the motion that we accept this as written by the county staff?
I would make the motion that we accept this, the change to the code, as it relates to 3102.3 type of construction.
Before you vote, could I ask Gary if you guys have any concerns about what's written there?
Thank you so much for asking.
Sir.
Tom, Brian, does that seem to be the spirit of what you guys were
Absolutely. And I also wanted to just add that Chris and Dwayne, I apologize if me having dialogue during Chris's presentation, I wasn't trying to interrupt, but I wanted to offer my apology for that. So
Not a problem. And I tried to rewrite this to honor your request exactly while providing
yes, sir.
clarification. So there's no intent to not honor what you were asking for.
Agreed.
Thanks for doing that, Chris.
Yes, sir.
Well, very good. So if there's no additional discussion or commentary, I would entertain a second.
I second. Motion.
Excellent. Thank you. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any objections? Perfect. And I think that going back to the our agenda, that wraps up new business. And that would be the end of the meeting. Dwayne, do you have anything else that you would like to add while you've got the group in front of you?
Not that I know of, no.
All right, very good. I'd like to, before we go, I'd like to thank everyone that's now on the committee for participating and welcome you to the committee. I thank you for joining me in this endeavor and look forward to our next meeting. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
1 second, Arthur.
Oh, yes, Bill.
Yeah, hi, Bill Walterscheid. Hey, so now this concludes the Building Code Review Committee. So now we advance this to the Building Commission for consideration. So Dwayne will compile the package, and make sure you follow the website and sign up for notifications for the Building Commission meeting that we'll put together, and once it clears the Building Commission as an approval, then it advances to the County Council for consideration, and then eventually signed by the County Executive. So we got some multiple steps we got to go through in order to get this changed approved. I just want to make sure everybody knew that there's some additional steps to take.
Thanks, Bill, for the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Dwayne, did we get a second? I thought I heard somebody say. Very good. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hey, John, there you
There's
are.
John.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah. Now that the
I could hear
meeting's
you
over.
guys the whole time. I just couldn't speak.
So, all right. If there's nothing else, thank everybody for their participation, and I guess until next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you. Take care.